PR Connections Radio presents.
Hello, world, and welcome to Watching Mental Health, a show dedicated to breaking down the stories, the research, and the stigma around mental health. Whether you're a provider, a professional, a patient, a loved one, or someone with lived experience, this show is for you. I am on a mission to make mental health more accessible and more digestible. Here's how it works. Every episode, we will bring in a new guest in the mental health space and talk about all things mental health stigma, treatment, and recovery. Do you want to be a part of the movement? Join me live every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Hi, everybody. Welcome to my first episode of Watching Mental Health. I'm so excited to be here and to be doing this. And this is your place for all things mental health. So on this show, we're going to be breaking down the stories, the research, the stigma, and all the stuff around mental health. And we're going to talk about treatment and recovery with providers, professionals, and those with lived experience. And I am very excited because on this very first episode of Watching Mental Health, I have the distinct honor of interviewing Dr. Sheldon Jacobs, who is a licensed mental health professional, advocate, educator, speaker, author, consultant in the mental health space. Dr. Jacobs has worked in inpatient, outpatient, and private practice for over 15 years and is also a media consultant here in Las Vegas. I've personally seen him on channels like PBS Las Vegas. I've seen him with the Review Journal, Fox 5. Dr. Sheldon also serves on the State of Nevada Board of Examiners for MFTs and CPCs, as well as serving as the vice president of the NAMI Southern Nevada Board of Directors. And he also is the very first Nevadan that's on the National NAMI Board of Directors. So I'm very excited to be introducing him today. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Dr. Sheldon Jacobs and have him talk a little bit about himself. And so Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for joining me for my very first show. And like I said before, I'm just really honored for the opportunity to interview you. You have done so many amazing things here in the community and with mental health. And so with that, I just want to, just start off by asking you a little bit about yourself. So tell us who you are in your own words.
Yeah. So first off, thank you for having me, and just congratulations for your show. This is big. I think it's so important that we have and create, these different spaces when it comes to spreading awareness for mental health and talking about mental health, because that's how we're going to build a chip away at the stigma, is by having these conversations and meeting people where they need to be met, as well as walking alongside of them. So just a little bit about myself. Let's see. So I think the biggest and most important role for me is just being an advocate. I care very dearly about mental health. And I think a lot of it has to do with my own trauma. When I was 14 years of age, I was nearly killed in a drive-by shooting, and the trauma from that incident has never left me. I'll say over the last couple of years, I have been more open about sharing that journey because I've learned that the more I talk about that journey and just my own trauma, the more people feel comfortable about sharing their own journeys, as well as feeling more comfortable just seeking help and support. And so that's why that's important to me. But for me, it stemmed from just my own recovery journey, like going to therapy, meeting with a therapist for the first time, and really understanding what was going on with me. Because for decades, I didn't know what was going on with me. I was having these flashbacks, I was having all these residual effects from the trauma. And because I was trying to conceal what had happened from my family, because at the time I was involved in the gang when the traumatic event happened. I was involved in the gang, and my family didn't know any of that. And so I had to keep everything to myself, in terms of that traumatic event, because if I would have shared with them that a rival gang, was trying to take my life, and then it would have raised a bunch of questions, and it would have been, I feel, more traumatic for my family. And so I was trying to protect them. And in so doing, I realized also during my recovery that probably wasn't the best thing because
Mhm.
I suffered as a result of not sharing my trauma. So yes, that's a little bit about me.
I really appreciate you just jumping right in because, as you mentioned, it can be a struggle to talk about your mental health story. And that stigma, it seeps in, I think, even to us as advocates and professionals. And we have to remind ourselves that it's okay to talk about our stories. And that, a lot of people have maybe gone through experiences that are tough. And by us sharing, it can help them to open up and to just know that they're not alone. And so I really, just appreciate you saying that. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of maybe what the diagnosis was, or kind of what that experience was, that the trauma or the mental health challenge that you experienced from that?
Absolutely. So after the incident, I was experiencing these flashbacks. I was experiencing avoidant behavior. So the area where it occurred, I was trying to do my best to avoid it, but it was hard to avoid it because
Mhm.
my grandparents lived, a few steps from where the traumatic event occurred.
Wow.
So I couldn't avoid going to my grandparents' home. So
Yeah.
every time my mother would take me to my grandparents, I would start experiencing these symptoms, and for years I had these flashbacks. I had these very these uncomfortable dreams or nightmares, whatever you want to call it.
And at the time, did you understand that those were symptoms of a mental health condition, or were
Mm-mm.
you not sure, like, what was happening when you would have these moments?
I didn't have a clue. Like I knew there
Really?
was some connection to the trauma. I did know that, but this is going back. So I was 14 years of age.
Mhm.
This is going back to like 19, I think 1992, 1993.
Mhm.
And so trauma wasn't really talked about on the level that's
Right.
talked about today. So there was just a lot of unknowns for me. So no, I didn't know what. I just knew something was going on for sure, and I knew that it was connected to what had happened. But that was the extent of it. And then when
Mhm.
I um, opted to go to graduate school, we had to see a therapist. So everyone in the program had to have mandatory counseling. And so that's when I started talking to my therapist about some of my symptoms and some of the behaviors I was engaging in, and then he diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress or PTSD. And one thing about post-traumatic stress, and you might hear me say this a lot. So
Mhm.
I always take out the D, the disorder. I think
Yeah.
post-traumatic stress is something that is normal in terms of, for anyone who experienced something very traumatic. You're going to have these residual effects or symptoms as a result of that trauma. So for someone who maybe experienced something very traumatic and didn't have residual effects from that trauma, I would be a little
Mhm.
more concerned with that individual versus somebody who's having these symptoms as a result of that trauma. So I think, talking about stigma, talking about labels and how powerful they can be. I always refer to post-traumatic stress disorder as just post-traumatic stress, and that's something I learned a couple of years ago from a police officer. A police officer here in the community I was on a panel discussion. I was having a panel discussion with this police officer, and he mentioned that, and that was the first time I heard that. This is like 6 years ago. And I
Yeah.
was like, wait a minute. And so ever since I've referred to post-traumatic stress as just that.
Yeah, I really like that. I didn't actually understand why you did that, because I have heard you in the past say PTS without the D.
Mhm.
And I think that you're absolutely right. Like, we as a society, there's a lot of, I think, trauma in our world. And, if you go through an experience, a very traumatic experience, a near death experience, one where maybe you've lost a very close loved one, you're absolutely right. It would be unnatural if you didn't have some sort of reaction to that. And I think that, there's that line between, crossing into a mental health challenge where maybe something more deeply is going on. And then also just recognizing when sometimes life just sucks, right? And sometimes things happen and you have to work through that. And it's okay to get therapy or to seek treatment for
Mhm.
even those little bumps in the road, right? Because the bumps in the road that don't get addressed, they're the ones that become big, big things later on. And they can build and build over time. And I'm sure you've known that, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I think, for me, once I was able to go to therapy and I was really able to, start my recovery. And
Mhm.
it was the most sort of, healing / powerful process that I ever endured. And it wasn't for it wasn't for therapy. I mean, I don't know where I would be, because, again, talking about cultural norms, and
Right.
in my family, we don't talk about, especially mental health challenges. We don't do that. And in my family, I learned that there was a lot of people that struggled with mental health and never talked about it, never received treatment. And so I realized that, I was only, reinforcing some of that. And so by me, going to therapy, by me talking openly about my mental health struggles, I think, that has allowed other people in my family just to start healing and to talk about their own journeys and some of their own struggles. And then looking at, just, our community as a whole, that's something that I do a lot. Like you alluded to, you always see me on TV or the news and the radio, whatever, wherever I can, I'm talking about mental health, because I think it's important that, we normalize it as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that family trauma is there, and nobody wants to talk about it until finally somebody does. And then everyone kind of looks around and is like, oh yeah, like I've also been experiencing these problems and these struggles. And so that's just so interesting that you touch on that. Tell me a little bit more about how you decided to go down this path. I know that it wasn't until grad school that you actually were diagnosed with anything, but before that, it seems like you had already kind of made up your mind that you really wanted to go down the mental health road.
Yes, great question. I think it started. So my aunt, she owned group homes for adolescent boys that were had been abused and neglected. So they were like boards of the court. And so I started working in her group homes, and we had a resident marriage and family therapist. And I kind of saw the work that he was doing with these kids, and I was like, I can do exactly what he's doing and be, just as effective as he, or even more effective, because I can relate to a lot of the children that we were serving. And so at that point, I started asking him questions about, his education, what did he do, and I think that's where I started. So I didn't always, know that I was going to go into this field. I wasn't like a psychology, undergrad major or anything like that. It was something that, I had no, I went to college. I had no idea I would be in this field. But I think working in the group home and working with children that had trauma on top of trauma, I think that's where, I was sort of, those footsteps were kind of laid out for me to go into this work.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. You when you show up and then you see people who are struggling and you think to yourself, "Oh, I think I understand. I want to help." And I think that that's so powerful that you had that and that you switched into what you knew was your calling, even though from the get-go you weren't necessarily going for psychology. I think that's really cool.
Thanks.
Just to kind of shift a little bit, you're a professional in the space, and I really value your opinion. And one of the hot topics around mental health these days is treatment. There are people who are, all pro medication. There are people who are very anti-medication. There are people who are in the middle. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, what does treatment in the mental health space look like to you? Have you seen, I know with your own experiences, have you seen successful treatment and recovery? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the person. I think that, you can take 5 people with the same or similar diagnoses and put them in, the same type of treatment, and they all will have a different response to that treatment. And so I think that, obviously for some individuals, and first let me back up. So first off, mental health is a spectrum, right? So you have people on different varying levels of the spectrum. So individuals that are more like on the, I'll say maybe the end of the spectrum that's quote unquote more severe, more pervasive. I'll say that for some of those individuals, not all, but for some of those individuals, the medication a lot of times tends to be the most effective approach, coupled with like therapy. I think research indicates that individuals that are receiving pharmacology or medication treatment, that a lot of times therapy is also even more effective when they're also receiving medication versus just receiving medication. And so I think that it's important to understand that. Also, when it comes to even therapy, obviously there's various types of talk therapy. There's other approaches like EMDR. There's brain spot. There's so many different approaches. And so for some people, talk therapy is not always effective. And so I think that, sometimes you have to kind of find what fits for you. And some of that comes down to even the therapist. I always say that therapy is 70 to 80% the relationship that you have with the therapist. So if you have a great
Wow.
connection with your therapist, the other stuff will kind of follow suit. The interventions, the strategies that are utilized in treatment, I think that will kind of come together. But I think
Mhm.
that relationship with the therapist is so important. And sometimes for some people, they may not find that right fit right out the gate. It might take 2 or 3 different therapists before you find that right person. So one of the things I want people to know is, don't get discouraged, because a lot of times what I hear is somebody might, see one therapist and this might not be a good fit, and then they kind of give up on therapy
Yeah.
completely. And I kind of equate it to like going to a barber or a beautician or a nail shop, right?
Right.
Sometimes you have to try different ones or different people before you find the right fit. And so I think when it comes to therapy, it's the same thing. And so just don't give up on it. It's a very effective mechanism. If you have the right fit.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think you're absolutely right. It's mostly the relationship. I didn't realize that, probably 70 to 80, but I think you're probably right. If at the end of the day you can do all the great, interventions, but if you don't have that relationship, then it's not going to work. Here in Las
Mhm.
Vegas, I have, personally seen people really struggle to access therapists. And so they'll spend 6 months, right, trying to access a therapist, maybe through their insurance. And then they finally get one. And then, it's not a perfect fit. And then they kind of give up because it's hard. I mean, frankly, and if you're struggling, it can feel even more challenging to put yourself out there and to keep looking for access to help. What do you say on that? I know that here in Las Vegas, you have seen a lot yourself.
Yes, and I tell people, if you have that problem, reach out to me. You can find
Okay.
me, my email, website, drsheldonjacobs.com. Reach out to me if you're having an issue, locating a therapist, or if you're on a wait list, whatever the case may be. Reach out to me.
I love it.
I've taken that on because that is something that you're right. I in this community in particular, Las Vegas, I hear that all the time, and that should not be
Mhm.
the case. Nobody should be, first off, nobody should be waiting, to see a therapist for 4, 5, 6, 7 months. That's totally
Right.
unacceptable. Second, these therapists, and I'm talking to all your therapists out there. If somebody's calling you, looking for services or wanting services or needing services, please call them back. That's another
Yeah.
issue that I've been seeing a lot of times is people,
They
a
just
lot of
don't call
therapists
back.
don't call back.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, every week somebody reaches out to me and has that complaint. That's unacceptable. So we have to do better as providers as well. There has been a lot of talk regarding there not being enough providers in the community, and there's some truth to that. But I'll also say this: there's a lot of providers too that only accept cash pay. There's more
Mm.
providers
Yes.
leaving, MCOs because managed care options or insurance companies. They're
Right.
leaving these insurance companies because the rate is the reimbursement rates are low for some, or it takes a long time to get reimbursed. So for a lot of providers, this is their income. This is how they earn their living. And so if you're not getting paid when you're supposed to get paid, that can be a problem. So there
Yeah.
needs to be more accountability held for our these MCO companies. Uh,
Mhm.
they have to do better because they're not doing a good job when it comes to that piece. And so, but yeah, there's a lot of providers that are just cash pay, and their rates a lot of times are pretty high. So the average person probably can't
Can't
afford to
afford
go
it.
see a
Yeah.
therapist out of pocket because of how expensive it is. And also, individuals that have insurance, sometimes the copays can be high. Sometimes the coverage can be low. I mean, so talking about parity and these other issues, which is I guess a discussion for another day. But
Right.
there's a lot of things in the mental health space that we need to do a much better job at. And so there are some folks working behind the scenes to address some of these issues. Also, some of these the workforce issues as well when it comes to providers. So there's some bills that have been passed
Mhm.
that where we're trying to address some of these issues.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's an issue, but it's one that we are trying to address. And you're right, there was some legislation passed this year, so hopefully that'll help keep our mental health providers here in the states. And I mean, just in general, it's a system wide problem in many ways. And I know that we're not the only place in the country that kind of struggles between that battle of mental health providers and insurance companies, frankly, because those parity laws are, it's still an issue. so and I know it's one that we're still working to get through. I know that you said that you're working behind the scenes. What kind of work are you doing? I know I've recently connected with a few groups that are actually doing full on mental health professionals just getting together just to talk about these problems and work through them. And they've been very insightful meetings. But for me, I'm kind of like wondering, as the layperson, what's next? What action can I take? I know that we just had our legislative session, but, maybe even reaching out to our policymakers. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yes, no, I agree. Definitely reach out to your policymakers, know who those individuals are. It's I didn't realize there's so many people who do not know who their elected officials are.
Right.
So I think it's important that you do that research, find out who those individuals are. One thing about Nevada is our community leaders, our legislators, they're very approachable and accessible. You don't have that in a lot of other states. That's not the case.
I agree.
So the fact that we do have the accessibility, I think it's important to reach out to them. And a lot of them are proponents of mental health. So I think that just continue to keep that door open as wide as possible is important. Also for me, just to try, I've been involved in several work groups across the state. Also just through NAMI, national work groups and things that are happening at the national level. And so I'm excited, to share. There's going to be a lot of changes that are going to be happening over the next couple of years, even within like the within the workforce space and jobs and corporations, and how mental health is approached and talked about, and looking at peer-to-peer support and accessing that that resource. And so there's definitely a buffet of issues and things that are being worked on. Obviously, unfortunately, some of those things, it's not going to be overnight, unfortunately.
Sure, yeah.
But again, just trying to stay connected, try to stay involved as much as possible. I know for me, sitting on various boards, participating in various committees, work groups, those are things. Coalitions. I created a coalition a couple of years ago for clinicians of color, where we come together, several times a year, and we talk about some of the issues going on in our community. How can we address them? So again, just trying to do my part, as much as possible to really just change this narrative as it pertains to mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an uphill battle. I mean, I know it is, but like you said, things don't change overnight. So it's on us to, keep these conversations going and to just keep showing up. But on the other side of that, there's a balance, right? I know that we can push and push and push and push. And as mental health providers, I know that you often want to, be there for that next person, but really self-care is like essential, filling your own cup. So I just wanted, we have a few minutes left. So talk to me a little bit about what self-care for a mental health provider looks like for you and what you think it should include.
Yes, it's funny you mentioned self-care, because I hear my wife like just yelling at my other ear, talking to me about self-care. Because like you said, because I am involved in so much stuff, and I always have to be mindful of that. And so for me, a big thing for me is exercise. Exercise and meditation. So I meditate every morning. Every morning and every night, I meditate, try to get as grounded and centered as possible. I'm also a big runner, so I run about 20 to 25 miles a week.
Wow.
That really helps me to kind of get my mind focused.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just a routine.
You do all these things and you run 25 miles a week. That's amazing.
I start about the morning. So I wake up about 3:30 a.m. Monday through Friday, and get to the gym, get on that treadmill, and that's how I start my day. And so that's how I'm able to kind of keep my cup full is by taking care of myself as much as possible. Like I say, exercise, meditation. Also, just I have a great family, great support system. So if I'm dealing with something, or if I'm stressed out, I can go to my wife. I can go to my brother, my parents. So I have people in my corner that understand me and are there to support me. So I think that's also important. And for therapists in particular, because we do, oftentimes vicarious trauma. So when you're treating somebody and you hearing their trauma, and it affects you. And so I think that as therapists, I think it's very important that we are intentional and mindful about, kind of how we're being impacted, and really just staying in tune with our own bodies, and physically, mentally, spiritually, even. I think that's very important. If you're not in tune with what's going on with your body, then you're gonna have a lot of difficulties as a result. So, so for me, it's a constantly, it's a daily process for me in terms of staying centered and grounded.
Yeah, absolutely. Every day it's important to take those moments to make sure you don't burn out, and that you can still show up in your best, most authentic self. And
Absolutely.
I love what you said about having a support system. I think that's so key. Us as human beings, we're social animals. I say this all the time. And so, we need people around us. And I even say this as an introvert. I love my alone time, but I also recognize I need my support system. So I just really appreciate your time. We're about at time here, but I want to leave with one last question I want to ask.
Okay.
And I think that I'm probably going to ask this question at the end of most of my shows, because I'm interested in this. And so this question is, do you think that a mental health challenge or a diagnosis is something that you can overcome, or something that you should learn to live with or accept as a part of you?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good question. That's a loaded question. Wow.
It's a loaded question. I know.
Well, I think there's, I'll say it like this. I usually will leave it up to the person, because, and the reason why I say that is because people have different views on mental health. So, and I'll give you a case in point. So, I have three people in my life that I'm close to. One of them was my cousin, who was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia when he was about 18, 19 years of age. Then I have two colleagues, one of them which I've been connected with through NAMI, and one of them has a severe form of bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder with psychotic features, and the other one also has schizophrenia. So three of them have quote unquote severe mental illness, or SMI.
Right.
And all three of them have different views of their own mental
Recovery.
health.
Yeah.
So my cousin says that he doesn't no longer have schizophrenia, because one thing, he's not being treated for it anymore. He has not taken any psychotic medications in years. He's doing really well, very well adjusted. But then my friend that has bipolar disorder, he says that I have a mental illness. I'm mentally ill. And then my other friend who has paranoid schizophrenia says that no, it's my mental health is fluid. So sometimes I'm going to struggle with it, other times I'm not. So again, a good case in point in terms of how people view their mental health. And so for me, because I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, and from time to time, I might experience some challenges connected to that. But for the most part, I've learned to work with it through just the therapy that I've been through, and the mechanisms that I've put in place to kind of help me. So for me, I say that my mental health I see it as fluid, meaning that, I was diagnosed at one point in time. Do I identify with that diagnosis? Not necessarily, because I've been able to, to adapt. I've been able to, so I guess the short answer is I leave it up to the person. I think that depending on the person, how they view their own mental health challenges, it's up to them. For me, I do say that I live with post-traumatic stress, because it has not completely gone away. I have not had any full remission from it. It's still there, and so I've just learned how to live with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. And I think it's true in many ways that every individual has their own thoughts as to if they're recovered or if they're still experiencing, challenges. And it's a fluid journey. Just, that's just kind of how mental health is. Mental health itself is fluid. Sometimes we have really great mental health. Sometimes it's more of a struggle, but we all have it. And I think that that's the important thing to keep in mind. So with that, I just really appreciate your time. The half hour went by super fast. And it's again, just an honor to interview you and to see you out in the community. And it's an inspiration for me. So definitely you're walking a path that I want to walk as well. And so it's great to be friends and to call you a friend. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate you.
Of course. And so this is Watching Mental Health. We are going to be live every first and third Wednesday of the month. And I'll have a new guest every single time. It's a half-hour show. So please tune in if you can. And then we'll also be, showing these afterwards. And so you can definitely catch the replay on my website at katierosewechter.com. So thank you again. And I'm so excited. This was a great first show. And I'm excited to see you guys next time.